Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is here in Washington appealing for more support. But as President Biden unveils more aid, some Republicans are asking how taxpayer money has been spent. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
And President Biden on Thursday announced a new military aid package for Ukraine focused on strengthening its air defense capabilities. And thus, as Biden met with Zelenskyy at the White House on Thursday, vowing to stand with Ukraine to help it reclaim its territory. Watch.
The American people are determined to see to it that you do all we can to ensure the world stands with you.
So we greatly appreciate that vital assistance provided by the United States to Ukraine to combat Russian terror, really terror.
Thursday marks the third time that Zelenskyy has visited the White House during the Biden administration. And President Biden announced a new aid after their meeting and saying that the new weapons being sent over to Ukraine would help it sustain its defense amid a tough winter of Russian airstrikes. But as Biden and Zelenskyy try to make the case that the U.S. needs to continue supporting Ukraine, over 24 Republican lawmakers on Thursday sent a letter to the White House explicitly voicing opposition to the $24 billion of additional Ukraine aid that President Biden is requesting. Specifically, the lawmakers are demanding answers on how American taxpayer money is being spent and whether Ukraine is making enough progress. And others, including those who met with Zelenskyy on Capitol Hill on Thursday, are questioning if the Biden administration is focusing on the right priorities. Watch.
Well, you just had 10,000 people come across the border and he wants to ignore that?
Russia is a problem for us, but China is our #1 foreign policy threat. #1. And we're not being honest about that. And that's a huge danger.
Bipartisan majorities on the Hill do support sending more aid to Ukraine. But the biggest question here is, given the small group of Republican lawmakers who are explicitly opposing it, will Congress be able to pass the additional $24 billion in Ukraine aid that both President Biden and President Zelenskyy would like to see? Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
A federal shutdown still looming, yet 5 House Republicans voting against discussing a defense funding bill. NTD's Arlene Richards tells us why and how the Speaker of the House is reacting.
The House GOP Thursday again fails to pass a procedural vote, also called a rules vote. The final vote, 216 to 212. It means the House won't discuss a bill to fund the Pentagon for the next fiscal year, which could help to prevent a looming government shutdown. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy blames the stalemate on 5 Republican holdouts.
Well, if they don't want to even vote to allow us to bring the bills up, how does anybody complain you haven't brought all the bills up? I mean, it's frustrating in the sense that I don't understand why anybody votes against bringing the idea and having the debate. And then you got all the amendments if you don't like the bill. This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down. It doesn't work.
The 5 holdouts include Andy Biggs of Arizona and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. Biggs said, shut it down.
At what point are we going to stand up and say no? Yeah. We're not going to keep funding the government. That's attacking the American people. Right. I've been here long enough to have heard 5-year plans, 10-year plans, and none of this ever gets changed.
Yeah. Greene said in a social media post that she voted no because they refused to take the war money from Ukraine out and put it in a separate bill. Meanwhile, a federal shutdown is looming. The federal government will shut down at midnight September 30th unless Congress passes legislation to renew funding. But government operations wouldn't come to a complete halt, as contingency plans do exist for critical services like border security and federal law enforcement. Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley said the House has a job to do.
Get in a room and figure it out, but do not play games with the American people or the taxpayers.
It's unclear when Republicans may try the vote again. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And to offer more perspective on the budget battle in the House, we just sat down with Congressman Bob Good of Virginia. Here's a look. Congressman Bob Good, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Congressman, what are some of the biggest challenges as the House tries to navigate through the budget process right now?
Well, we came to a framework agreement last night in a healthy, constructive, intense, exhaustive conference meeting that was kind of called impromptu, really member-led. I've been involved over the last several days with some intense discussions, I should say, with about 30 members of Congress trying to find a path forward. What's the lowest spending number that we can get 218 votes for? And out of that flowed a meeting that the Speaker held with the entire conference yesterday, and we came to an agreement on 1.526 trillion for the top line spending number for our non-defense, or for our discretionary spending generally, I should say, increasing defense spending but cutting non-defense spending back to near pre-COVID levels. I think the challenge now going forward is the spending order of those bills, because many of the conservatives want to make sure that we're passing some of the bills with the spending cuts and not just putting forward initially the bills with the spending increase, which is primarily the defense bill, with the promise that we'll get to the spending cuts later.
So are you satisfied with some of the immigration elements, the immigration package that's attached to the budget bill?
Yes, the appropriators who've been working on the bills, and this has been a months-long process, and yes, we should have already passed these bills really before we went back to our district work period in August, but they're implementing good Republican policy, and bill by bill, they are eliminating the climate, environmental, energy extremism that's permeated every policy that the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer regime perpetrated on the American people over the last 2 years, eliminating a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, CRT, LGBTQ, transgender funding, transgender surgery funding, abortion funding, those sorts of things. And so taking a modest step, admittedly modest, with only now a 4-vote majority in the House, a modest step in cutting some spending, which is historic because we never cut spending here, but it is real spending cuts, and implementing good policies to reverse the harm of the Biden regime. But we got to get that right for 218 votes.
Congressman, I want to read a Fox News headline that just came out. It says, House descends into chaos as GOP rebels again sink key defense vote a second time this week. Is that a fair assessment? You're there, you're in the mix.
Well, I don't know that I would call it chaos. No, we're a deliberative body. We're a legislative body that requires 218 votes to get things done. Each of us is entrusted with a voter card by our constituents who elect us to represent them, to do what we think is right, and then to explain to them why we're doing what we're doing, and then be held accountable accordingly. Often you're trying to make decisions on what do you think is most right, as it applies to policy and legislation. If I had 218 votes, I would get to do what I thought was exactly right every time. I might be wrong on it, but at least in my view, it would be what I thought was exactly right. And so even with me agreeing to vote for the defense bill, as I did twice this week to advance that bill, I did it with some consternation, because I also want to see in writing the 12 bills together and how we're going to achieve the agreed spending amount that we again had a framework for last night. And I want that commitment on the bills we're going to cut the spending. And I think that's what most of my friends are feeling, or the reason why most of them who voted against advancing the bill, that's where they are.
Congressman, the Freedom Caucus takes a lot of heat for being so-called hardline in the pejorative. How would you explain what the Freedom Caucus stands for?
Well, let me give you a contrast for a moment in the sort of hypocrisy or inconsistency with the folks who allege that. And I said this in the conference meeting yesterday with 200 or so members there. Where is the outrage directed at the moderates in the party who are trying to hijack the party and trying to take hostage sort of legislatively, that are saying that if we were to cut our spending to the pre-COVID levels, the dollars that I've been fighting for now for several months, that the Republicans voted for 217 to 4 back in April, that were threatening, if we didn't give on that number at all, they were going to go sign a discharge petition to advance Democrat priorities. Now think about when the Republican conservatives, the Freedom Caucus or so forth, has sort of drawn a line in the sand, or not went along with the company line, if you will, is to try to advance Republican priorities and to fight against us succumbing to the Democrats or caving the Democrat demands or moderating our positions. Here, the Freedom Caucus has certainly never threatened any action that would mean we would be working with the Democrats to advance their priorities, to advance their legislation, to advance their policies. So all of us together make up the very slim 221 to 213 majority that we have now, a 4-vote majority. And so all of us can contribute to blocking things from advancing forward. But the Freedom Caucus is doing that to try to, when we do that, I should say, is to try to help Republicans be the conservatives we claim to be, to do what we said we would do, to justify the trust that the American people have placed in us when they gave us the majority, and not to betray them once again with the majority they've given us.
Congressman Bob Good, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
A state of emergency in Eagle Pass, Texas. Thousands of illegal immigrants are overrunning a tiny border town. NTD's Arian Pazdar spoke with a former border agent who was at the scene.
Border agents in Eagle Pass, Texas on Thursday, overwhelmed by the amount of illegal immigrants. The mayor declared a state of emergency on Wednesday due to the influx. Eagle Pass only has around 30,000 residents. Reports say 15,000 immigrants came to the small town in the past few days, half of the town's population.
There's no room for them. There's nowhere to put them.
Victor Avila is a former supervisory special agent with ICE and Homeland Security. He's currently running for Congress.
Now, you just got back from Eagle Pass. What do people there, people on the ground, what do they say? You know, local law enforcement, residents, what do they say about the situation?
They're fed up. I talked to a lot, and by the way, it's not even a partisan issue anymore. Democrats, Republicans, they just want something done.
He says thousands of people are sleeping under bridges across the small town. Meanwhile, one of the immigrants in Eagle Pass says his home country of Ecuador is being overrun by organized crime.
There are criminals who go to school, they threaten the kids, they force them to take drugs, all that. So we don't want our children to be like that.
In related news, Homeland Security on Wednesday night made a major announcement for almost 500,000 Venezuelans. They'll be allowed to stay in the U.S. and receive a work permit in the near future. On Thursday, a reporter asked if this will attract more Venezuelans to come, possibly worsening the situation in Eagle Pass, Texas.
The president have worked very hard to implement a strategy when it comes to the border that is humane, safe, and has orderly enforcement. That is something that we have tried to do and worked really hard to do these last 2 years.
She added that Homeland Security also allocated more agents to the border in Wednesday's announcement. Homeland Security says the Venezuela decision was made based on Venezuela's increased instability and lack of safety due to the enduring humanitarian, security, political, and environmental conditions.
Many people would agree that Venezuela really is a dangerous place to be right now. So is Homeland Security doing the right thing in extending the protected status?
I talked to a lot of the Venezuelan nationals that are here. A lot of them, a majority of them, have not been in Venezuela for a long time. They left Venezuela many, many years ago and live in the surrounding countries.
Homeland Security's rule applies to all Venezuelans who came to the U.S. before July 31st. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.